sequence start to begin here in 5 minutes. That call from the ground came from the CORE, or Crew Operations Resource Engineer here in Hawthorne, Mission Control just behind us, and that went up to Commander Nick Hague. He's going to be doing the majority of the communications during the flight downhill today through splashdown, and they'll be communicating with the CORE all along the way. Now, we did mention that they are flying on Crew Dragon Freedom. The naming of spacecraft has gone all the way back to the very beginning of this human spaceflight program. This is a nod to Alan Shepard naming his spacecraft Freedom 7 during the Mercury program. And so the crew that first flew up on Freedom a few years ago had the opportunity to name this Dragon, and they named it Freedom. That was Crew 4 that was the first flyers on this spacecraft. It's also flown for Axiom Mission 2 and 3, and then, of course, today for Crew 9 as well.
Yeah, actually, fun fact about this particular capsule, of those 4 missions that Sandra just mentioned, we have seen daytime splashdowns for 2 of those. Today will mark the third daytime splashdown. So there's something lucky about this particular capsule that gets daytime splashdowns. Nighttime is great because we can see even more clearly the capsule streaking through, but I personally love the daylight views because we really get even better views of the recovery team operations during that phase of the mission.
Yes, absolutely. And if you follow along with our missions, you'll know that sometimes weather is a watch item when it comes to undocking and splashdown. We do splashdown in the water, so we want to ensure that parameters like wave heights and wind speeds and precipitation, lightning, all of that is looking good for the crew and the safety of those recovery personnel. And today the weather is just pristine. We got off of space station on the very first attempt. So I'm joking around and saying that it was because it was St. Patrick's Day and we got really lucky with the weather.
I wouldn't disagree with that. Speaking of weather, we will be hearing from CORE probably around 2:20-ish. Typically, before we enter the period of loss of signal, or LOS, we will hear an entry briefing from the CORE, the Crew Operations Resource Engineer, and they will deliver important information like updated anticipated splashdown and loss of signal times to the crew, as well as the wave height and wind speed. So we'll be standing by to listen in on those. Like I said, that will happen shortly after. Typically after trunk separation. I can't quite remember if it's before or after deorbit burn. It must be before. But in any case, we'll be hearing all of that coming from CORE. In fact, that individual is seated there in the room on your screen. That is SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. That room is located just over our shoulders, and that is where Dragon operators are standing by on console, monitoring the progress of Dragon as it continues its way home. It's been, at the point of splashdown, it'll be about 17 hours since Dragon undocked from the International Space Station. The team there in Mission Control, there are multiple teams, in fact, and they cycle through shifts to ensure that everybody gets the required rest and sleep periods, just like the astronauts on board. That Crew Operations and Resource Engineer is seated there in the room, and that, like Sandra said, is the primary voice that we'll be hearing communicate from the SpaceX team to the crew on board.
That's right. And so it looks like we're about 3 minutes or so from the claw separation portion of today's flight. The claw is a portion on the spacecraft that holds the trunk to Dragon. Following claw separation, we're going to jettison or remove that trunk because it's no longer needed. The trunk has solar arrays on it that provides power to the Dragon spacecraft. But now that we're beginning the reentry process, we need to go ahead and jettison that trunk and able to expose the heat shield, which is really going to do the heavy lifting as Crew 9 re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. They come in at 17,500 miles per hour, so they really need to ensure that that heat shield absorbs that heat, and there's...
Deorbit sequence start.
And so we did just get communications there that the deorbit sequence start has begun. So here in just a couple minutes from now, we expect to hear information or a call back about the claw separation having begun. And again, that kicks off that trunk separation portion that I was discussing to remove that, expose the heat shield, and then eventually we'll have the deorbit burn. And we'll continue to walk you through all of these milestones as we approach them ahead of our splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
Yeah, we're very excited to bring the Crew 9 crew home. Sandra, we were talking about the trunk separation. That trunk is on a trajectory that will re-enter in the atmosphere and break up upon that re-entry. The heat shield itself is one of my favorite parts of the Dragon capsule. It is the workhorse of the re-entry phase. It will work to protect the Dragon capsule and the crew members on board during the re-entry phase as the temperatures outside of the capsule build up to, I believe, about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit in excess of. And meanwhile, the interior of Dragon stays a very comfortable temperature. That heat shield does a lot of the work, and we'll see that plasma build up on the exterior of the capsule. As a result of the plasma that builds up, we will lose communications with the crew. This is known as loss of signal, or LOS. This is roughly a 10-minute period on average, even less than. I believe today it is probably about 6 or 7 minutes long. It kind of depends on the mission, and it happens for every Dragon capsule that re-enters the atmosphere. Due to that plasma buildup, we're not able to communicate or command the capsule, so we stand by while we wait to regain communication after we pass through that period of loss of signal and get what's known as AOS, or acquisition of signal.
Continuing to stand by for claw separation, and then we'll look towards trunk separation. It'll be just about a minute or so after that. That happens pretty rapidly in succession. Some of our milestones will take a little bit longer throughout the day. For example, we will have a deorbit burn after that will take about 7.5 minutes and helps get Dragon set up in the right trajectory to splash down in the Gulf off the coast of Florida. So continuing to stand by for claw separation.
Nominal trunk jettison.
All right. Great news there. That trunk has been jettisoned from the Dragon capsule. So the claw was separated. That's the mechanism that connects the telemetry and power between the Dragon capsule and the trunk. In order to expose the heat shield underneath Dragon, we had to jettison that trunk, and so we just got confirmation that that has happened. So that is great news. Basically means that telemetry is looking good, and that the nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield, like I said, is now exposed and ready for atmospheric re-entry. The trunk served its purpose by gathering energy from the sun through its solar cells and converting that to battery power. Since we separated the trunk, we can't generate any more new power, but we really don't need to since we're coming home and Dragon has enough battery power already stored. Now, up next, the final steps that Dragon will perform prior to re-entry: the slew, or the maneuver to deorbit burn attitude, and then the deorbit burn itself. This deorbit burn is the last time that the forward Dracos, which are the 4 thrusters located on top of the spacecraft under the nose cone, it's the last time that they will ignite. The deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to return to the splashdown zone off the coast of Florida, off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida, and that will last about 7.5 minutes once it starts.
And so deorbit burn is targeted for 2:11 p.m. Central Time, so about 2 minutes from now. As we mentioned, it's going to last about 7.5 minutes, again, helping to get Dragon into the precise trajectory to ensure that splashdown occurs in the area that was calculated and where the recovery team is already in place, ready to support splashdown operations today. The recovery vessel Megan is the ship that is going to be utilized today. And we also have what is called fast boats that go out first to check the spacecraft and make sure everything is looking good before the recovery vessel Megan approaches. So that whole recovery process takes about an hour, I would say, from the time the crew splashes down to the time they're on the boat and the crew gets out of the capsule. And we'll continue to bring you live coverage through every step of the way today as Crew 9 returns home.
Indeed. Now, let's take a little bit of a closer look at Dragon. One of the great things about being close to the space station is that we can use space station cameras to look at Dragon. But now that Dragon is on its way home, we don't have those external cameras. So here's an animation of what the capsule looks like. We've got the pressurized section, the capsule on the top, and the trunk or the unpressurized section on the bottom. That's where those solar panels that we manufacture in-house are located, soaking up the energy from the sun and turning it into power for the capsule. At the very top of the capsule is the nose cone. That is where the Dracos, the forward Dracos, are located. That nose cone is currently open, not closed like we saw in that animation. Once we get through the final maneuverings for the re-entry phase, we will close the nose cone capsule just before Dragon begins its atmospheric entry to protect that forward hatch there located along with those forward Dracos. So go ahead.
Oh, that's right. I was going to mention that the nose cone does open shortly after launch, and it remains open the entire time that Dragon is docked to the International Space Station. So as an example for this particular spacecraft, Freedom, since September when it docked to the International Space Station, remains open that entire time, and here shortly it will close for the very first time since September.
So quick recap of what Dragon has done in recent history here. We basically began preparations for re-entry known as the Deorbit sequence. So Dragon released the trunk. As we said before, we separated the claw, we released the trunk. It next will slew to the deorbit burn attitude. Slew basically meaning maneuver, so it will position itself correctly to execute that deorbit burn. We want the heat shield side to be facing forward, or first, if you will. We want that to be the leading edge of the Dragon capsule, as that heat shield is meant to basically be an ablative material for the heat that it will incur. Once we complete that deorbit burn attitude slew, we will initiate the deorbit burn itself. That will last for several minutes, expecting that to be to start here any moment now, actually, and then it will go until about 2:18 p.m. Pacific time or 5:18 p.m. Eastern time.
And I did hear confirmation that deorbit burn is underway. As we mentioned, it's about a 7.5 minute burn. So within the last 10 minutes, Dragon has jettisoned its trunk and initiated the deorbit burn just seconds ago. As mentioned earlier, for those operations, NASA and SpaceX closely coordinate with the United States Coast Guard to establish a safety zone to ensure public safety and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, as well as the crew on board the returning spacecraft. Multiple notices are issued to the mariners in advance of and during recovery operations, and Coast Guard patrol boats are deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones. So we do want to stress to the public the need to respect this safety zone. Recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation, and any other boats interfering increases the risk to not only the astronauts in Dragon, but the teams working to recover them from the water and the safety of those that may come too close. So for the safety of the crew, which you see there on your screen, your safety, we recommend you sit back and watch as we'll continue to bring you the best possible views of our astronauts' homecoming.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time that we will utilize our 4 forward Draco thrusters. Forward basically meaning at the top of the Dragon capsule. Dragon Freedom has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on its final trajectory to the landing site right off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. So basically, it is the last burn that the Dragon spacecraft executes and is what really locks it in for that precise landing. As you can see on your screen right now, Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander are using their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, the Draco firings, and trajectory details such as entry angle, spacecraft perigee, and how much distance remains until deorbit burn termination. As I mentioned earlier, Dragon is flying itself. So all the crew has to do is stay strapped into their seats and keep tabs on things. Although I must say, if I had one of those window seats, it would be pretty difficult to restrain myself. Now, with Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander ready to deorbit and splash down back on Earth, they will be heading to one of 8 targeted sites supported by SpaceX and NASA. All of these sites are located off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of America or the Atlantic Ocean. Spreading the supported sites across multiple locations helps maximize the return opportunities for this mission and future crews, lowering the chance that we'll have to wave off due to bad weather. For those of you following along, you'll know that today's splashdown marks our final Dragon recovery on the East Coast. After 6 great years of successful recovery operations off the East Coast, we'll be moving all Dragon recovery operations back to the West Coast.
And as always, NASA and SpaceX jointly select our splashdown location. And for today, the prime recovery site is off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. The selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory or path that it follows, what landing sites are available and have favorable weather, how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home, and the sleep schedules for the returning crew members, as well as, of course, the big one, the weather.
We'll start with calculating daily return options based off of the space station's current orbit and Dragon's capabilities to maneuver and line up for re-entry. The time from undock to landing at the primary site can vary from less than 6 hours to more than 39. Getting home the quickest comes with some obvious benefits, but we always have to make sure the crew is properly rested for dynamic operations, preventing us from scheduling 20-plus hour days for them, of course. Trajectory and ballistic experts provide the daily opportunities that would line up Dragon with the 7 landing zones and split them into what we call ascending and descending opportunities.
Dragon uses its Draco thrusters after leaving station to execute a series of altitude-lowering maneuvers and to line up with the selected primary site. It can also change to different alternative sites while in a free flight if sudden weather moves in that we may need to avoid. So, as we mentioned, weather is something we're constantly looking at, making the final call to proceed about 2.5 hours before the crew undocks. So, for the Crew 9 return, we looked at a number of weather items. Some of the obvious ones are no rain or a chance of lightning in the recovery zone, both for the safety of the crew inside Dragon and the recovery teams in the water. And we're also looking for wind speeds to be less than 15 feet per second or about 10 miles per hour, and relatively calm seas so that we can safely execute recovery operations, which includes landing a helicopter on the recovery ship to fly Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander back to Florida. Once Dragon began flying today, we had a number of additional checkpoints to either proceed towards the primary site, head to the alternate, or select a new zone based on real-time weather data. These checks happened all the way up until we were in the final hours before the deorbit burn, which has just about a minute or so left in it. And this is the last burn in the trip home that commits Dragon to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
Now, we are currently waiting to conclude the deorbit burn. We've got less than a minute until that finishes. We will expect to hear a call out for nominal burn, which will confirm completion of that deorbit burn for Dragon Freedom. We can see images there from the touchscreen display panels that the crew utilizes in flight. We can see the visualization of exactly which one of the four forward Draco thrusters are firing. That's why you have kind of like a strobe effect there.
And if you're just joining us, you are looking at live views of the Dragon Freedom. On your left is Commander of Crew 9, Nick Hague. To his right is Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Grabenkin. And also in Gorbanov, excuse me, that is Alexander Gorbanov. And then also in the capsule today is NASA astronauts Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore. We're awaiting confirmation that their deorbit burn is complete, which is the last burn that's going to help set them up on a trajectory to splash down off the coast of Florida.
Deorbit burn complete. Performance nominal. Nose cone closure initiated.
Freedom copies.
All right, excellent news there. We heard the words we were looking for, nominal burn. So that means that